evening. I would like to open this next current school, political school, and we are going to explore a little bit together one of the countries that I like very much because somehow I've been linked with it, or to it, through history, because there used to be a huge empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it was a good empire. And I know it was good because my father was born under that empire. And he happened to be a soldier of that empire. And he thought that it was good. Why was it good? They didn't try to denationalize people or turn them to speak German. Nobody would try for them to speak Hungarian. It's an impossible language. Maybe Finns can understand a little bit. But certainly, they actually left the people as they were. They could actually cherish their cultural traditions. They could speak their own language. And there was actually a competent and honest administration in that empire. So it was clearly by far the best empire. Much worse was the Ottoman Empire, and a third one, the worst after Genghis Khan, was actually the Romanov Empire. In fact, I wrote a huge article, I think for a special journal in Singapore for some reason, about the three empires. And I know, not just from my father, though he actually thought so highly of it, that we had a picture of Franz Josef in our kitchen where we lived, actually until 39, until the Red Army came to liberate us, so-called from the Polish Empire. And I also had a wonderful friend that pretended to the throne, Otto von Habsburg. He was a multilingual person. He knew 6 languages perfectly, including Hungarian, by the way. He was a wonderful political journalist. He man also that wrote some things, but a man of great wisdom. And he knew a great deal about Ukraine. And in fact, he knew it also through his father, who happened to be a cadet in Colombia. And as late Otto, when he died, I did write a very big article here in our Ukrainian paper, because his father must have had the first romantic experience when he was a cadet in Colombia, because he spoke with such warmth about it to his children, that I guess it must have been the case. So that was about the empire. Of course, that empire now reduced itself to a nation state. However, somehow they did it without too much pain. There was a little bit of pain, but not too much, and certainly not many scars. When I compare how the poor Brits, for 2.5 decades, they somehow just could not get used to the fact there is no longer a European empire. But in Austria, and I've been there, let's say during the social period, but certainly, you just don't feel, if you like, don't see the scars, don't feel the pain. And of course, when you go to this most wonderful opera, or after that, go in the old city, and eat a dish which may not sound that tasty to you, but I find it wonderful, this boiled beef, which is one of the specialities of Austria. So, certainly, not only because I like it so much, but it is a very, very good model country for us to explore. I would not say it tonight, but for the fact that actually recently there was a presidential election. Unfortunately, the election turned out that way. You can say, yes, Austria is a very nice small country for us. And of course, we have the luck with us, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Austria, Madame Popular. I call her simply Armin, if you allow me. And we have a really expert, if you like, from the political point of view, in Austria, which will be introduced by our moderator. So I just wanted to open this up. If you want to say a few words, please do, and then we'll go to business.
Thank you. And we go over there and speak from there, okay? Dear Professor Hartwig-Lesching, thank you very much for this invitation, which you extended to the Austrian Foreign Service. And I'm quite glad that I have today here Ambassador Inchen, who is the head of our cultural diplomacy, which we are doing in the Foreign Ministry. Thank you very much for your nice words about Austria and giving Austria sort of a role model. We in the Austrian Foreign Ministry give a lot of importance to culture. Culture is one of our instruments in foreign policy. We have a lot of dialogue forums going on in Austria, dialogues of the religions, dialogue of cultures, bring people together. We use culture as this kind of gathering people together, exchanging different points of views, exchanging about politics, about society, because this is the only way we can overcome all those even bigger growing dividing lines in societies in the world. I would like to refer to some of the work we are doing here in Ukraine in terms of cultural diplomacy. The embassy has a cultural forum in Kiev. We have also cultural institutes in Lemberg and in Odessa. We have 5 Austrian libraries all over the country. We have 3 people teaching at universities here. And we have 5 honorary consulates all over Ukraine. In Lviv, we have one in Odessa, in Chernivtsi. We have 1 honorary consulate opened in Dnipropetrovsk, and only last week we opened the 5th honorary consulate in Kharkiv. Those consulates for us are very important in terms of cultural work. The honorary consuls help us also in doing cultural work, and it may show you the importance we give to those institutions, to those honorary consulates, that our Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry in Vienna came here to open it, and we had a great evening of culture in Kharkiv together with artists from the region there. It was really, really amazing, the number of people you have here in the cultural field. They really, really, let's say, it's not hype, it's European culture. This is Europe, and I think it's really important for us to get to know more of Ukrainian culture in Austria, to have more exchanges, to feel what really is going on here. So I'm very happy to be here today and maybe to discuss later on with you also some questions you might have on what is cultural diplomacy for us. But I think this will explain Ambassador Inchen to you.
Thank you. At the end of this working part of the evening, we will have a little bit of music, which is actually just to prove that we also believe that cultural diplomacy is the most important thing, and Ukraine can integrate with the Western world precisely through the culture. And you will see a couple of youngsters here, a couple of youngsters who at the very tip of this, so if you like, cultural iceberg. So I'll now turn you over to the moderator and fade away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's very loud. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, despite the rain. I would say that we are very privileged to have today very interesting speakers. And the first of our speakers is Dr. Injun, who is the Director General for Cultural Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria. And we also have three actually speakers from Ukrainian side. One of them is Danilo Lukivsky, who until recently he was the advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine and before that Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. We will also have Dmytro Kuleba, who is the representative of Ukraine at the Council of Europe. We hope that he's here a little bit later. He's struggling with Kiev taxes. And I also will comment as an expert, not only as moderator. My name is Olesya Ostrovska, and I used to work as the first Deputy Minister for Culture in 2014, and now I'm the head of analytics from our company, which is Think. But before that, before we start a more free discussion, I would very much like to ask Dr. Injun to share her views about a few things. If you like, you can sit here, or if you can stand there, whatever is more convenient for you. Okay. And I would firstly like to ask Dr. Injun to share a reflection on a rather general thing. I would like to ask Dr. Injun to explain, to describe what is in the core of cultural policy of Austria and how culture can be helpful, how can it become an instrument for diplomacy, international relations generally. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having invited me, Professor Havrilician, dear Hermine. This is an honor for me. It's my second time to Ukraine. I've been here as a kid when I was 7 to Odessa. I will try to hopefully give you some ideas and maybe ideally some inspiration. I was born in Vienna, studied law, music and languages. I always wanted to be a creative, crazy person and ended up being a civil servant. All the things I did before I became a very serious person, of course, helped me now to understand artists. So I'm a regular Austrian diplomat with a strong leaning in artists, about 20 years of experience in working with artists. Before I started preparing this talk, I was thinking, well, how will I do that? I will definitely not read to you the general speech on cultural policy. I said, no PowerPoint presentation, no figures, no diagrams, no statistics. I wanted to do something for you. So I prepared a talk that will contain some literary quotes and some words that go maybe deeper than what a bureaucrat usually has to say. Let's start. First quote, inauguration, with the human condition. It comes from an amazing Romanian philosopher called Emil Cioran, who emigrated to France and then mastered the French language in such a way that he changed the French language, so precise he was about what he was saying. Of course, being a Central European, he was eternally depressed, yet what he gave to European philosophy was fantastic, and one of our greatest writers, Christoph Ransmayr, said he started writing because he has read this Cioran. So I start with a quote by Cioran. Paradise sighs in the depth of our consciousness as memory weeps. And so it is that we reflect on the metaphysical meaning of tears and of life, like a longing that unfolds endlessly. Culture is everything. It's what we are, what we feel, how we see life, how we hope and how we dream, and how we put our hopes into reality, and also how we deal with pain. Culture is the expression of our values, of our traditions, of what we have inherited, and what we want to transform. The notion of culture is a very large one. Of course, it goes from making the Japanese rolls to the wood carvings in the pre times. Ultimately, culture is everything that humans develop on their path from mere existence, like an animal, to become human. The longing for culture is expressed already in the carvings. Just one thought, the element of time. We were just talking about this. The internet and our consciousness that when you are young, you're already a digital generation, that we live in the bulb of internet, email. At least I have to work 400 emails every day. So it's worth to have a little look in the past. In the past. Cultures could develop in their wonderful expression in isolation over thousands or hundreds of years. Think of Egypt, India, Japan. Generally speaking, since the travels of Marco Polo, or Christopher Colombo, Vasco da Gama, or Captain Cook, cultures now are in permanent contact with other cultures and in ever-increasing exchange with one another. While it took Marco Polo decades to go back from his travels to China, back to Venice, on foot, on horses, on camels or donkeys, to tell his compatriots about the wonders and the treasures of a completely different world in faraway China, it only took months until Cortes or Pizarro could report back to Spain about the cultures of the Aztec and the Inca, their ships carrying loads, so they would say, of what they have stolen, of gold and other treasures taken back to Spain. Today, cultural exchange and information can cross the globe within seconds. No need to carry shiploads around to make the experience of the other. We want to know, we go to the internet, live reporting makes us global citizens of the world. And the question is, who controls the information? We are dominated strongly by images, by the fast heat waves that can be sent around to our minds through modern media. Yet the big question remains, what have we really understood? Or what do we know about the other culture? And cultural encounters are always twofold, positive and negative. The historic encounters had disastrous effects, of consequences of destructions, the devastation of Aztec and Inca culture, Peru and Mexico, or the Native American culture in the US. Migrating peoples, colonialism, missionaries always have destroyed or oppressed other cultures. And today, with modern weapons and technology, destruction has reached an unprecedented level. Look at the destruction of cultural treasures in Iraq, the destructions of statues along the Silk Road, in addition to natural disasters. And there is another aspect of destruction which comes to say in a peaceful way, and this is the globalization of culture and the destruction of diversity. And by the way, I'm not an ideologist, I just wanted to, one has to look at the things that are happening, no? We can call it the McDonald, you know what I mean. Thank you. Or languages that disappear, or like species of animals. But let us also turn to the positive aspects of intercultural encounters. To give you a few examples, the meeting of Orient and Occident resulted in the beautiful Moorish culture, a new vision of mathematics. Without that exchange with the Arab world, with the south of Spain, and the introduction of the number 0 in the mathematics system, we might not have reached the moon. Through this encounter, we learn to make calculations. Another example for a positive encounter is the increasing influence of Buddhism in Western culture peacefully. The philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer was profoundly influenced by his encounter with Buddhism. Exchange and encounter take place all the time. Cultural exchange is a permanent element of our life. And here's an interesting actual example from Berlin. New political systems show a tendency to want to eradicate memories of prior systems. An interesting example is the city castle of Berlin. I don't know whether you have heard about it. It was built by the Prussian kings in the center of Berlin, then somewhat damaged by the bombardments in World War II, and then demolished, the city castle demolished by the DDR, Eastern Germany, as a sign of the class enemy, so it had to go. On its very position, the palace of the communist state was built as a symbol of socialist modernity. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the socialist palace, after intense discussions, people were saying, oh, I met my husband there, please leave it there, in the DDR. It was demolished again. On this place, they are building now the historic Prussian city castle in order to recreate the historic ensemble with all the museums around it. There are plans to integrate the ethnographic museum in Bali into the Humboldt Forum. Thereby it's intended to create a connection between time, different museums, the German Historic Museum and the old new castle, in order to look at history as a whole. Just that thought for you. So enthusiastic. Culture is our life, and identity is a creative road. Don't anybody allow us to tell you that identity is something fixed. Professor Havlicek knows, he has been traveling the world. I've been traveling a little bit. After 25 years abroad, I came to the conclusion, of course you long for the other cultures, other ways of life. You add on something, add on language after language, and in the end, with the years, I found out that I am what I was in the beginning, but growing. The perspectives are growing, horizon is growing, understanding is growing, but it's like an old song of an emigre, expelled Austrian, the fascism, because ich bin halt nichts als ein Österreicher. I'm just an Austrian. You're singing this in New York. Another thought, to see what we are, what we can be. We stay what we are, but we need to grow for the world. Yeah, I have 3 questions for you. I probably will not have time to answer them, but just for you to think. 3 questions I've asked also the students at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, from all countries. I asked them question 1. What are, in your personal understanding, the basic elements that make up the fabric of your own cultural identity? Okay. 2, are there cultural or artistic expressions within your own culture that have particularly influenced your understanding of cultural identity in your country? Have you already been in the position or the situation to represent your own culture abroad? Or how would you go about that? How would you explain that? Very important questions, because that leads to the work of how countries are perceived. So, what is cultural diplomacy? I think it's a nice word because it sounds peaceful. Cultural diplomacy is a tool of foreign policy. Countries engage in cultural diplomacy in order to influence and shape intercultural exchange, as well as values and perception within the other country. I mentioned briefly, I will not elaborate on this. You know the book by Samuel Hunting, Clash of Civilizations, thinking always happens in models. It should not happen in ideology. We always move to models. He thinks that the future clashes or the future problems will not be around on ideological lines, but on cultural lines, because he says cultures are growing over centuries and decades. You can't change them quickly. Well, and it can be, they can be have a huge potential for conflict, as we see this now with religious conflicts. So any piece of identity can be misused to create trouble. What can be beautiful for one can be the enemy of the other. But so it's important to have that thought in mind that there might be or are problems that are also linked with culture. That we in Austrian foreign policy think that, Ambassador Propelas just mentioned it, that this aspect of dialogue, we call it dialogue, among cultures and religions and civilizations is very important. And dialogue means to respect that there are many things that we do not know. Last week we had a delegation from China here, from communist China. They were coming with Taoist masters. And you know we want to talk about, Europe wants to talk about China about human rights. Chinese politicians were coming with spiritual Taoist masters. They are monks, they are sort of half enlightened, very severe living people, talking about the beauty of Tao Te Ching. And through this fantastic work of Lao Tzu, as a work of philosophy of wisdom, but it can also have relations to how you govern a country, we were talking with the Chinese slowly about something about human rights, not really eager to make a point, but feeling in a process of dialogue and with huge respect and understanding, we can learn each other. And then we came to a very interesting conclusion that the concept of human rights is much older than the European idea of human rights, or expression. So, what is cultural diplomacy good for? I use a catchy phrase from the Austrian foreign policy concept: to make friends and to win people and to tell stories. And to tell stories ideally together. Together means, an example, for years we've been working at a common book of history for school books with the Czech Republic. Because the Austrian scholars think, oh, the Czech are telling a story about Austrian history that we would like to, the perceptions, and the Austrians maybe in Czech, so they make very good example, still a long process, make a school book together in order to, discussing is also part of the project, so telling stories ideally together. I was talking about the bigger horizon to find new ideas. We need cultural exchange to get great ideas from outside. To build networks. Nothing works without networks. To create opportunities. The two words, cultural diplomacy, contain a promise. It's the promise of an open, free and meaningful contact with people belonging to different cultures. It means learning about each other, and by learning about the other, repeating myself already, we learn to know who we are ourselves. Cultural diplomacy always holds as an ideal, peaceful and open-minded access to the other. So when it goes, things become very problematic. Culture always works. Second quote by one of the most amazing Austrian writers, Ingeborg Bachmann. I'm quoting her. It is clear to me that we must maintain order and equilibrium, that there is no stepping outside society, and that we have to hold each other in check. But within these barriers, we direct our eyes toward the absolute, the impossible, the unreachable, be it love, freedom, or some other pure entity. In the face of the impossible, we expand our possibilities through the possible. That we produce this chance briefly, still have a few minutes? What do we do in Austria with cultural foreign policy? To start with the basic ideas and ideals, we believe that cultural cooperation unites and provides insight. Culture overcomes borders, opens doors, and door opening is not just a sort of nice watchword. It is a door opener. Your Ukrainian artists in the world, your writers, they are door openers. I remember when I was posted in America, Asper Melnichuk, writer friend, gave me his book, The Ambassador of the Dead. What I learned through the history of his family, his ma and grandma, about Ukraine, long time ago, I will never forget. So the books are utterly important in a cultural diplomacy. Opens doors, unites people, and so on. Culture in Austria, that's our image. Even of the politicians say, culture, that's nice, you sing and make music. No, it's an image we luckily have thanks to Mozart, Schubert and some others in the world, and it's a good image to have. And everyone who works in culture, it's always a winning ticket in a way. Congratulations to the song contest, by the way, so you went around the world with that. Cultural activities in Austria and achievements arising from a combination of tradition, creativity, and innovation. They are decisive for our identity, and they constitute our contribution to international dialogue. It is part of our foreign policy. Tradition is easy for us. Tradition is always there. We do not support folklore groups, also even if we think it's nice to have it, but the folklore and these things have to work their own way through the friendship, association and so on. So we are careful with presenting folklore abroad, but we want to help young people. We want to create opportunities for young people. How do we do that? We ask experts in our country to choose them. So we don't dare to choose them ourselves, but if the foreign affairs ambassador will say, oh, my cousin is a nice flute player, could you please present her? These times are long gone. We develop programs of who we can recommend abroad, and then we send these people abroad. In music, it's every 2 years, 25 ensembles or soloists in all genres, world music, jazz, new music, whatever. And it's working very well by promoting them. What do? We get a new image of Austria. We show that not everybody plays Mozart, but they are doing interesting things. They do world music. They might be playing in Vienna with Ukrainian players. So we get that modern image, and by doing that we create, for people where experts are sure that they will have a career, we give them the first concerts and world tours. It's about 1,500 concerts every year that we do abroad. We do the same with literature. Of course, writing is more difficult because it's even more subjective. But the literary talents will publish a book, best of, young generation, send it abroad, hope that they get translated. We do the same with films. Documentaries, very interesting. I know you have a great documentary film festival, just heard it. We do it with films, we do it with dancers. And so we try to help young people to get international careers. And then, what becomes interesting for us in Austria, because in Austria we have to make PR in the parliament, that funding comes. Even if in a rich country like Austria, funding can be a problem. We invite the artists when they come back to tell us the stories of what has happened, the encounters have done, how they have encounters have influenced their careers, how they see life differently, how it shapes and changes careers. Very important. what becomes now, because I've talked about Europe, increasingly important is the aspect of European cooperation. There is this network of course, Ukraine as a country of Eastern Partnership, as a country for unique cooperation. This stuff is developing now more content-wise. Before, the European countries would do together a film festival, or they would do some festivals. And now, Brussels, together with UNIX and the Commissioner and the Parliament, they start to shape this more like a policy, because they see that dialogue gets important, and that together we can create really an added value that is more than just doing a project together, but it's doing policy together and thinking of what can be done together, also for Ukraine. Amen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Angel. It was very interesting. The description about Austrian cultural policy, which I would just like to remind briefly to why do you need culture and diplomacy? To make friends, to find new ideas, to build networks, to tell stories. Here in Ukraine, we know telling stories is very important for us as well, but there is one more thing that we need to acquire through culture in the field of diplomacy, and that is having a voice. And Ukraine hasn't had a voice in the international community for a very, very long time. That was Ukraine, but it was often voiceless. For example, to find this Huntingtonian view, which we really oppose here in Ukraine and don't very much believe in it. Also, very interesting thing that you mentioned was your focus not on traditional culture such as folklore, but rather on contemporary culture and young creatives. And this is something we really have to look into in Ukraine as well, while we've been too much concentrated on folklore for a very, very long time. And here I would like to ask my colleague, Danilo Lubkiewski, beloved colleague, Danilo Lubkiewski, to give his perspective on the Ukrainian cultural policy in terms of international relations.
So I do thank you, Alessia, for such a long introduction, and I'm really happy and I'm grateful to Professor Avalishnikov for this generous invitation here. So I'm happy to see so many clever eyes, nice faces, and the sense of the question in the air. So that's why I'm here, and I'm really happy to be here. Ambassadors, I'm really delighted to see you, and I do thank you, Excellency, for such a profound lecture with an extremely good knowledge of the essence of the cultural diplomacy. It attracts me a lot, and for that, I do thank you very much. So let's raise the question of almost impossible way how to answer that. The Ukrainian cultural diplomacy, how to deal with that? Is there any Ukrainian cultural diplomacy, and so on? So, that's a tricky one. But there is another tool how to answer any tricky question. Start with your own introduction. So I will prepare that. I will start with my own introduction, getting back to the matter of the cultural diplomacy. Since we have such a lovely atmosphere here and with such profound views, I will try not to spoil it with my moderate and humble contribution. So, what's that? What the cultural diplomacy really means? I have no idea. The only point that I would like to make was to present a number of features that I believe belong to the sense of the cultural diplomacy. And for that, Your Excellency, I feel completely disappointed, since you said almost all talking points that I tried, to present. So it will be very difficult for me to distinguish another original idea here, since such a comprehensive study and look at the cultural diplomacy, conquers all. The cultural diplomacy. I believe the first feature of the cultural diplomacy is a self-esteem self-esteem. You must love something and respect something to present it. This self-esteem plays well with self-confidence. You have not only love, but to trust what you would like to deliver to anybody else. So, if we speak about that, if you want to start the cultural diplomacy as a phenomenon, you have to love your own. You have to know your culture, you have to respect the language, you have to know your literature, and you have to fall in love with your own nation. In that sense, that will provoke your positive feelings, how to present it and how to perform. So that's about self-esteem, self-understanding. Let me quote another famous guy, who is Ivan Malkovich. I believe that you know this name, who is an editor and a famous Ukrainian poet, recently published the anthology of Ukrainian poetry. So he simply chose a wide range of poets with peculiar poems in there, and he made a strong introduction to that, saying that I did it with an aim to make everyone who read this book love the sense of that poetry, the air of that poetry, the air of that book. So that's about the desire to love. That's about the desire to respect and to find your own self-dignity inside of it. But the cultural diplomacy matters because that's a diplomacy. So that's quite a talkative thing. You have to talk, you have to deliver. Meaning that you have to have someone who will listen to you and will hear your message. So if we say so, definitely for Ukraine, that's an enormous thing to open itself before, let me say, the European or Western audience, but hopefully globally. But definitely, if you do that, you have to find those who will receive that message, who will have this enormous sense of, a wish to find in this great zone of unknown nation, a desire to open and to discover that culture, to see what matters, if we speak from such a global and serious point of view. Since we look at the whole situation from the standpoint of a contemporary man, it means that there is a territory with a nation, almost undiscovered. There will be a strong will to discover it. It means that your cultural diplomacy will meet a person or persons who will listen to you, who will try to love it. Here you may speak about tactics. I wouldn't be so brave to say that we should put our folklore or, I would say, classic heritage aside, pretending that we start from the new page. That's impossible. But definitely we have to attract in the way when those who listen will open their ears. That's a very difficult thing. And here, if we say that cultural diplomacy is about self-esteem, cultural diplomacy is about meeting another and talking to another, then we will come to the third feature that I believe is important in the sense of the cultural diplomacy. That's a global narrative, or the narrative of all our actions, the purpose why we are doing this, why we try to talk, why we try to perform, what is the reason behind our intention simply to show ourselves. And that's the narrative of principles, the narrative of values, and the narrative of very human sense of human rights, rule of law, human life. So it goes all together to the sense of our global efforts. Here, let me jump for a second to another important thing, because I do believe that the cultural diplomacy is the leader and the engine of the foreign policy, not vice versa. The cultural diplomacy, that's an example of how you understand yourself, trying to tell that story. And the foreign policy, then, will play a supplementary role. So that's a paradoxical feeling that I'm sharing with you. But nevertheless, I would like to live in that illusion. Let me say that One of the recent books written by Dr. Kissinger depicted the understanding of the world order. Many speak about the world cultural order. Many speak about the energies, the impulses, about the moving features of that world cultural order. And here, definitely, you may quickly find some general features that unite different spaces. If you look at the Russian Empire, we may definitely identify a number of features that belong to that. We may see their wish to be proud, and their subconsciousness, a sense of fear. You know, and they play with that. And they try to find this equilibrium, as you said. I'm trying to finish, okay. Nevertheless, so that's an equilibrium that Russia, for ages, tries to settle. In Europe, that's a wave of diversity, of pluralism. For that reason, this is very important for Ukraine to understand right now, since we have a right and a duty to tell this to our European partners, that we would like to see an open Europe. We would like to see the Europe which does not follow the track and the trend of self-isolationism, since it doesn't correspond to it doesn't contribute to the general idea of what we are doing. So, for all that, let me just sum up. For all that, definitely, the very desire is not the only instrument that you need to have. You need to have the ability to perform the cultural diplomacy. And here, definitely, all state institutions in Ukraine are very easy targets to be criticized very well for doing nothing, or almost nothing, or some important things comparatively with no difference. But let us not do this, remembering that all of you, ladies and gentlemen, are the cultural diplomats. As you bring your culture outside, as you love your culture and your native language and your native literature, as you perform as a real cultural ambassador of Ukraine, you make a difference. You show the message of cultural heritage, legacy, and vision to other countries, and that's very important. Just trying to finish that. Professor Havelishin mentioned the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You know, I was born in Lviv. I do remember that the Austro-Hungarian Empire once was there. So, but he also mentioned a famous Otto von Habsburg, who is famous for one of his sayings. Once, he was approached, and he was approached with some news saying that, you know, Austria and Hungary will play football another day. And he looked at that person and said, against whom? So you can understand the joke. So against whom we are playing this football? Austria and Hungary, that's definitely about the contemporary time. So what I'm trying to convince you and to confess and to deliver, that everything is about desire, everything is about the ability which should be built on, and everything in the cultural diplomacy is about, you know, about finding the person who will listen to. Trying to find that person, and you will do a lot. I do thank you.
Thank you very much for the brilliant speech. I would also like to add a little bit to the list of loves which you need to have to serve as a voice for your country. It's also, in my opinion, love of your weaknesses and being brave to talk about them. And take one of the most celebrated Ukrainian films in the past 20 years, and that's The Tribe by Miroslav Slobodshpitsky. A very, very deep and disturbing film about an orphanage. And the story is it really needs thinking, a lot of thinking, and a lot of emotional investment. And it's about the wounds. But as one of the Mexican directors said about this film, the film that was awarded with many international awards. Probably the most celebrated film since Novzhenko, I guess. Since Marjan, probably. And as the Mexican, one of the Mexican directors said, this is a very sad story which could have happened in Mexico as well. So what you need to do when you think about cultural diplomacy is trying to speak in universal level based on your local context. And that might mean that sometimes you have to tell great stories, not only beautiful stories. Even if you take Jamala and Eurovision, the stories she's telling is very brief. However, it's a very pop version, but what is important in diplomacy, you don't have to be, in cultural diplomacy, you don't always have to be very shiny only. You don't have to be very glamorous only. Sometimes you have to be brave to tell something which might be not a very pleasant thing. For example, think about Marshall Pratt, Sergei Zhadan's novel, which comes under the name Invention of Jazz in Donbass, I think. It doesn't show Ukraine as a very easy to live, a place that is easy to live, but it's a very deep story. So that is something important. And now I would like to ask Dmytro Kuleba, who has joined us now, to speak a little bit about institutional support for all the beautiful things that we just mentioned, because Dmytro is the person who, Ambassador Kuleba, is the person who actually started a very important process in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which actually Danilo was doing as well, but Dmytro institutionalized it, creating a department, or is that not a department, bureau? Public Diplomacy Division, which is very important. Can you share a little bit on that?
Yes, hi. I'm sorry for being late. It's very hard, difficult to get a taxi in Kiev. Welcome to Kiev. Well, I will start with an important correction. It was actually, though Danilo said that he doesn't know what cultural diplomacy is about, he was the first man in the ministry after his appointment as deputy minister to actually start discussing cultural diplomacy, and he was the first one to invite professionals from the art scene and art management to get together and start talking about the changes we needed to bring to our system to make it efficient and to create cultural diplomacy as an institutionalized process. And that's what, for some reasons, we had to complete, because Danilo was promoted and went up to the office of the Prime Minister, but we continued this process in a very simple way. And actually, I missed the keynote address, but Austrian example was one of the patterns for us, because Austria, with its, and I will be very honest, with its limited resources, has one of the most efficient mechanisms for cultural diplomacy. It's not like the German one or the French ones when they have big institutions like Goethe Institute or British Council or the American mega system of cultural diplomacy. But this is exactly what we needed to see. How can you tell your story through culture with limited resources, but with powerful cultural background and heritage? But of course, Austrian resources are much bigger than ours. Ours are really limited, yes, so far. One important thing that I want to emphasize here is that you have to understand that there is a clear difference between the promotion of culture abroad and cultural diplomacy. In cultural diplomacy, you have to subordinate culture to your foreign foreign policy interests and objectives. And I'm sorry if I sound too pragmatic, but in terms of real practice, this is exactly what you do. You have foreign policy interests and priorities, and you use culture to achieve them, to reach goals which you identify for yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't have to promote your culture. Definitely, that's a broader concept that needs to be implemented as well. So, since we didn't have, and we still don't have, a big institution or a small moderate institution like Ukrainian Institute, that's the initiative that was taken kind of on the flags of the Ministry of Culture under the leadership of Minister Kirilenko. So we thought, what can we do and how can we do that? How can we work without any institutions? And I applied, I offered to apply a communication mechanism of networking. So we decided if we cannot create institutions, let's create networks. And we continued what Danilo did. We started creating networks with art managers, artists, curators, inviting them. And the first thing we had to explain to them is that they can actually speak to us. That we're human beings, we're not bureaucrats. They can come and they can speak. So currently, what we managed to do next, we institutionalized these networks. We created a coordinating center for them, and that's this public diplomacy division, which has cultural diplomacy desk as a part of it. I don't know when and how the Ukrainian Institute will be created, but I know that networks already exist. People know how to reach out to each other, people know who does what, and they manage to implement projects and to promote Ukrainian culture abroad and also to do cultural diplomacy. Without very limited resources, we are not able to cover even the whole European Union. We simply can't do that. But we can target specific countries at specific moments. And the capacity we are building now will help us to keep moving forward and build our capacity based on the experience we are gaining. But this will not be possible if there's no genuine dialogue between bureaucrats, and we are just bureaucrats. We should not identify what kind of art should be presented here or there. We should only say that we need cultural promotion in that country at this moment. So there should be genuine equal partnership between bureaucrats and professionals from the market. The easiest thing is to accuse each other, is to say that cooperation is impossible, but the most important thing is to keep working together. If we manage to work together, and I can spend hours telling you, bringing some cases, some specific cases to your attention, but we always succeeded when we worked with each other and when we respected each other. It's an equal partnership, and inside the system, inside the ministry, we promote a very simple message. You should treat artist, curator, art manager as an equal. That's the key. Only then you will be able to build a truly successful partnership that will make your cultural diplomacy efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let me add a little bit before we come to the comment that Dr. Injin has.
Just two remarks. I did not agree on your differentiation between art promotion and cultural diplomacy. I understand the concept, but it can even fall in place together, depending if you target a special topic. But I think it's hard to use artists for the purpose of a government. But as I said, I think good thing is that you can, through the arts and books, you can express everything, and it's very important also to express pain, for example. This is, as you said, well understood. I wanted to briefly add something. I have a quote that goes close with what you just said, because we say that bureaucracy has to serve artists. That's a different concept than that the artists, as you say, that the artists have to serve the state. Art is free. I have a quote here from the year 1945, when Vienna was in rubbles. There was the Fritz Wotruba, a sculptor, who wrote, "Art in a new state," is the end of a text. I mean, it's 1945, but still some good things are valuable always. It is up to us to decide whether we want to let ourselves be deceived again about what is valuable. Deceived by the businessmen who sit everywhere in corporations, churches, political parties, and the academics of arts and sciences. Let us be attentive from the start, 1945. Let us not denigrate the people who transpose the image of our dreams into works of art. If we give art its freedom, we shall be free. It is our most precious possession. Let us not seduce artists with luxury, nor leave them in destitution. Let us make it possible for them to live in dignity in our young state, for art and life are one. I like that as a concept. Last point, two things I wanted, three, briefly to mention. We started to promote actively women, not only in foreign service, but the stories of women untold. We made a book, 144 biographies of very interesting Austrian women in the history. We put in Maria Theresia. We put in Maria Theresia and Empress Leopoldina in Brazil, but also women who were the first in Austria, the first doctor, the first graphic designer, the first psychotherapist. That is the generation of your grandmothers, our mother, grandparents, great-grandparents, the first, and telling their stories, because it's a bit of society that is missing. This is having a great success in the world. It's working well, because it connects a story of pain. Somebody else in Mexico says, I know a story of pain and a story of women. So we promote women's biographies and stories of women. And then, now we're doing something. We want to promote young people and their innovative ideas about society. That's totally new for us. We asked young people, said, what are the greatest? Like one in Austria now said, the supermarket without garbage. You know, garbage is a problem. Things like this, promoting this. And then for you to think, digital diplomacy. What can you do for Ukraine through the internet? Because a reading in a nice room somewhere is good, can influence, but the whole aspect of digitalization in diplomacy is huge. Booked.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we've got time. And before we move to questions, I would like to give one finishing remark, a rather practical one, to pick on what Dmytro was saying about institutions. Because to become a voice for Ukraine, to help culture to serve as a story for Ukraine, you need to have institutions, institutional support. And this is something Ukraine doesn't have. We've just started to do that with Danilo and with Ron. I will think about it. So there are two ways which are being discussed in Ukraine. One is creating a Ukrainian institute, which is an institution close to, let's say, Polish Institute or other similar entities, state agencies. The other one is not creating an institute, because there is a huge risk that a new institution will be corrupt, but not in the sense of financial corruption, but rather in the sense of decay, right? In this legal framework that we have now. And another thing is actually to support existing networks and agents through, for example, giving grants to those who have potential and who can work as voices and representatives and storytellers of Ukraine. I myself would support the second idea, and this is one of the ideas that has been developed in the so-called Strategy for Culture 2025, developed on the platform called Culture 2025, which I am a part of. If you like, you can Google it and find out more. So, for you to grasp it, to understand the idea, this discussion about the institution to help Ukrainian voice to be heard on the international scene is very vivid now. The state institutions do not know how to institutionalize it efficiently now, because our legal framework is not very friendly towards this type of activities, and there are these two different proposals. This is now under discussion. We are a country under construction to a certain extent, and this is also one of the important discussions. Now I will pass the microphone to Danilo, and after that we will ask for your questions so that we can have a real dialogue finally.
Thank you, Alessa. Just two major points that I would like to make them briefly. First, about love. Definitely, if you love someone, you will love with all weaknesses, diseases, and with all troubles that love requires. So for that, it goes without saying that definitely your initial basic love to your own culture will move you to describe it, to explain it, and to deliver that. So that was my point. And the second one about institutions, definitely. That any state institution is a disaster itself, and this is the very lesson well learned, from the very beginning. But, we all speak about the cultural diplomacy, and the cultural diplomacy is not a result, that's a process. In this sense, we have to inspire, build, and develop those institutions that may work. Definitely. Here, since Ukraine is a special country with special background and legacy, I believe that different approaches must be combined. Because there is another illusion that some non-governmental organizations will pick up the whole burden of the cultural diplomacy. That's another illusion. And this is no way out from that. Since the state has to take care of the cultural legacy this nation has abroad. All Ukrainian archives, cultural places, Ukrainian tombs, Ukrainian museums, our presence that state needs to care about, as Austria does. For that reason, I believe that the approach must be developed and established in a very smart and reasonable way. But for that, in the state institution, you need to have a band of enthusiasts who may lead that process, who will not be afraid of obstacles, of the Soviet routine, of the stupidity of the bureaucracy. So you have to show your leadership over there. And there will be no thank you for that. But that's a beauty. For that, it's a pity that so long, being a new Ukraine didn't manage to perform that. I'm really happy that finally we have the cultural diplomacy unit in the foreign ministry, and I wish the foreign ministry to finally finalize legally that department, because it's really required and definitely needed. But the time passed by. So we definitely need a desire, which for the politicians mean a political will. If there is none, nothing will help. And for non-governmental institutions, it's very important to understand that you have to present that level of competition that will suddenly pick up the bureaucrats, diplomats, and move them to the level of that culture that we are all wish to belong to.
Thank you very much. And now we will go into deep and long discussion, but we will not. We will ask for your questions or comments. Yes, please. How do we manage with the microphone?
Yes, we can take this one.
Thank you for assistance.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentation and comments and your personal experience. I would like also to share my experience a bit. My name is Pavla Cherkashin. I represent Youth Diplomatic Initiative. It's a Ukrainian NGO specializes for young people, young generation being involved in foreign policy, in international relations, research and study of this field. And my personal experience is connected with Austria. In 2004, when I was a teenager, and actually my first trip abroad was to Austria. I was so impressed with your country that being there, visiting different museums, places, nature, especially in the Alps near Salzburg. It's very beautiful nature in Austria with forests, mountains, very beautiful palaces in Vienna. And coming back home later, I became very interested with world architecture and history, which is actually still my hobby and still one of my field of interest for the whole of my life. So Austria changed my life somehow. And I have two questions to Mrs. Indian about, one is about globalization. You told us about the influence of globalization on the world now. We can see positive, negative influence. I would like to ask you about your country's personal experience in this field. Should Austria and Ukraine as well resist and prevent these negative developments of globalization, or should we develop a parallel actions and use, journey to positive experience? And my second question is about cooperation of Austria with its international partners in terms of cultural diplomacy. For example, we know that not only Austria, but Germany and Switzerland is also a German-speaking country, but German in Germany and in Switzerland it's a bit different from Austrian language. Do you have some kind of cooperation in the field of languages? Is it institutionalized, or it's more like on the level of just promotion of your culture?
Thank you. I would also like to ask you, Father, to be brief, if possible, and concrete, so that we can have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Globalization, I think there is no way to fight it. It's just a fact of life that with the way we live now, you cannot fight it, you lose it. But I think we should try to make the best of it. And my hope is always young people. For example, in Vienna, they start with the idea of globalization comes with the idea of depossession. That something becomes so big, you have a feeling that it's nothing. It's so big, it's overrunning over you. You don't know what it is anymore. Something so vague and so big. What do young people do now in Vienna? The young companies, they start to make things handmade, local produce. They start to do things where you would think that's old-fashioned. They try to do the things we used to think that are nice, handmade, local craft. So they do things, and this is a sort of tiny anti-globalization attitude. It's all over with the young people. Buying food locally, produce small, be modest, and not, something to have the feeling of something we can control. In terms of language, Germany puts a lot of money in promotion of the German language, because of course they think if you know German, you're closer to Germany than when you don't know the language, sure. We do it too, but we have a smaller operation, it's called Österreich Institute. There are 8 of them, and they work in the empire of our dear professor, and they try to make friends with the German language there. Also, they've been very innovative, doing short classes, not you enroll for a long class. They do short programs for business people, German for business people, come Austrian, the Austrian German. We do a little bit of it compared to the German, but we do it, of course. Thank you.
Can I make a short comment? Because you talk about globalization. Now, we are they have become global physically, communication-wise, transportation-wise, etc. But there are a lot of different religions, there are different philosophies, there are different civilizations, in fact. So, we have, since globalization has been mentioned a lot, in the proposed list for Universal Declaration of Human Obligations, which we badly need, we only talk about human rights and not human obligations. The last point, it's 15 point, the last point is that all the people that gives a reasonable level of education actually should, it is an obligation to learn something about these different religions, different civilizations, respect them, accept them. So it is, as members of this global society by now, we should not just limit ourselves, for example, to Europe. We should really actually explore this other one. We should read Quran, we should read something about Shinto, and actually we should really, and that way, by the way, too, we'll be also more effective, let's say, as a country, if we know really these different countries, different civilizations. So that was just the point on globalization, how to cope with it, understand it, learn about it, and therefore become, let's say, an interesting part of it, and then I'm part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. There.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Alexandra Kudrytsk. I also represent the Association Young Generation which will change Ukraine. I have a question, a little bit maybe connected, maybe similar. What are for you, for example, 5 keystones of Ukrainian culture? What's your perception of Ukrainian culture? And if you would make a strategy for promoting of Ukrainian culture, would you work more with traditional, maybe classical issues, or try to play more on, like, according to global trends on global arena, like we've seen a case with Jamala, or for example, like there is another trend of popularity of electronic music festivals. Would you try to promote your own unique things, like architecture or food, or play on these global stages?
Okay, thank you. Who would you like to answer your question?
Like who wish? I would be interested in perception of Ukrainian culture from foreigners, and maybe about forming of Ukrainian promotion from Ukrainians.
Just a short remark. I think it's very important for Ukraine to create a different narrative of the country outside Ukraine. We know a lot about Ukraine via the media. People have the image of a country in a very difficult situation, a country in war. Ukraine is much, much more than that. Ukraine has a rich culture, Ukraine has huge talent, and you have to show this talent. We have opened the honorary consulate in Kharkiv last Friday. The honorary consul and his wife, we organized a fantastic event, Art Roof, Kharkiv. They invited a lot of artists from the Kharkiv region. Fantastic culture, fantastic music. We had a very, very good discussion with all those people, and this is European culture. This is really European. You have to show your country as a European country, which you are. So I would recommend young people, send them out, support them. The foreign ministry has to support them, because otherwise they will not make it. And they have to be there. They have to represent your country. Of course, folk arts, it's good, folk music is good, but this sells by itself. Young people, young talented people, give them a chance to present your country and give them a chance to sort of write a different story about your country.
Okay, thank you. I would, if I may also comment as someone from the cultural field. You asked whether it's better to promote unique culture, which you describe as traditional culture, or something which is more global. I think there are many people who would argue that uniqueness is rather connected to those contemporary things than to those traditional. So this concept of being unique is very tricky. What is important to promote, actually, is to promote something which can be connected with those people on the other side you are talking to. If you have people who are more interested in folklore and very traditional culture, use that. For example, I remember my meeting with the Deputy Minister of Culture of Qatar, who was basically interested. He was not interested in classic music, he was not interested in film, but he was interested in folklore. So there you should use that language. But when you try to speak to people in Berlin, it's maybe better to speak via different voices. And contemporary art would be good. I myself would obviously insist on contemporary culture, contemporary arts, creative industries, and younger creators. But again, you need to know who you talk to.
Just one last sentence about this. You're absolutely right. I think each field of the arts has its own network. You know, the classical music has classical networks. As you said, it's very clever to go about it like this. You have this young talent, so you get in contact with the networks who will help them. But if I were Ukrainian, maybe, I don't know what you have done so far, I would have a meeting with some crazy, creative people from all over the world, conception-wise, like not marketing, not the cheap marketing people, but the excellent artistic marketing people, and sit together with some very creative Ukrainian people and say, so what are really our stories? What is close to us? What is it we want to tell? And then create a few elements out of that are your, I don't say everything is image and marketing, sometimes it's so boring, but still you need it to help us. You need it. We do it too, no? Something that we think is so, that you want to tell. But I would develop it in contact with the other. But each network has, each form of the arts has their world. I will not forget. I saw art collection from Ukraine, and it was from a colleague who works in Austria in Russia about Maidan, artistic reactions on Maidan. It was such good artistic work. It was amazing. We showed it in Vienna. And
Now think about the second word into Ukraine connected film, and that is Winter on Fire, about Maidan, and that's a very modern film language. Now we have the new.
Yes, I will try to make it very brief. I always promise now to deliver. Definitely that we need to work for that unique features that can be easily transcended to the different foreign audiences. Yes, that's true. But is that the only way how to pick up some extravaganza and to perform in Vienna and to have 5 minutes of glory and that's it? I believe that we have to combine different approaches. For instance, the Ukrainian unique Baroque music, it definitely has an audience for itself, but no one knows about that in majority of cases. Or Ukrainian artists, or Ukrainian literature. That's another thing why we definitely need state institutions, but with a smart approach and good vision. For that, I do support this genius and brilliant idea to bring different conceptualists to Ukraine, as we did, for instance, in May 2014, when the foreign ministry, I was happy to initiate that gathering at the Diplomatic Academy, that we brought different philosophers from all the European countries to discuss why it is important to discover and open Ukraine. So I believe that this experience not only should, not only have to, it must be, renewed. And definitely, if we think about this message, so we have to think about what we are going to tell our foreign partners and how can we contribute in this general global narrative of cultural diplomacy. That's an enormously interesting task to do. You know, I listen to you, Your Excellency, and definitely I wish we were in your shoes. But what I feel myself, that we may have our own shoes. We have so many talents, so many clever eyes sitting here. We have so many, I will say, inspirational energy in their hearts. Nothing is impossible.
Well, for now, we actually plan for some culture and music that way.
Yes, we will be finishing. Just let us have Petro Kuleba with his final comment.
I'll be very short. As our guest rightly said, every art has its network. So the real question is not what kind of art. The real question is what kind of message. That's it. Thank you.
That was really professional. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. We can go on having a conversation after the concert, and now we are very privileged to have two brilliant musicians performing for us, and these are two violins, Ilya Budarenko and Tatiana Shmenda. Thank you very much.
Vigyana and Ilya, they were 14, they're not brother and sister, and they, among others, have performed already at the Carnegie Hall. And I just wanted to show you a nice sample of our cultural diplomacy. Just what they have common. They've started performing from the age of 8. They're now actually also composers. They're full members of the Association of Ukrainian Composers. And of course, they not only play the most capitals of the world, they're now playing, they're going for a tourney, preparing tourney to Japan. So I think really that we do have something to offer to the world. And this is what we think will actually, through the cultural diplomacy, the doors will open a bit more for our economic integration in that world and ultimately for the political integration in that world. Дуже вам дякую, Василь. I guess there's a little reception outside, so maybe I can also thank the speakers, thank the ambassador, thank the moderator, and our operator quietly sitting back there, so it works. And of course, Olena Mikhailova, that manages it all quietly. Україну. Мрійте, вчіться, дійте. We have a slogan, dream, learn, do.
Алло. Так.